Seifter.
And I'm Wendy Zies Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hi everyone.
Hello everybody, welcome
to Arcane Mark. Today we're going to talk to you about metagaming. Now, if you've ever heard about metagaming in TTRPGs, and honestly, you probably have if you're watching this video. I'm not sure if our channel is one that people who go into when they don't know a lot about our TTRPGs already. If you have, though, you've likely heard of it as like this kind of specter of a bogeyman, this horrible thing that's one of the worst things that could happen that would be in an RPG horror story. It's like, you know what they did?
They metagamed.
They were metagaming.
Or stop metagaming, or like, oh, that's metagaming, don't do that, or that kind of thing.
Yes, it's used only as a derogatory or even like a slur of a metagamer. As this horrible thing of, it's basically considered to be synonymous in some of those stories as cheating. It's some kind of awful thing that people are doing to mess up your game, to give themselves huge unfair advantages.
Or to smash down the fourth wall.
To pull everyone out of the story just because they want to win ruthlessly, regardless of the cost. Maybe like from a Magic the Gathering standpoint, someone who is like so spike and they want to win that they're just going to crush over the lore and the Vorthos elements entirely and just do whatever they want. That's what you hear about metagaming when it's kind of passed around in the tabletop RPG community most of the time. And look, sometimes some of those things can be what metagaming is.
But there's also a lot of instances where metagaming can be used as a force for good, and also where the definition of what metagaming is in a particular situation is kind of squishy. And by trying to avoid metagaming, people actually make the game experience worse for themselves and others. So,
and they might be metagaming.
Yep.
In fact, they probably are. So let's pull the curtain back, discuss the full definition of metagaming, when it can be a problem, when it can be an assistance, and when trying to avoid it can make the game worse while also still being metagaming even more than you would have been otherwise. So, in general, the prefix meta has come to mean, like, more or less because of Aristotle's Metaphysics, the chapter that was after physics, and then people were like, well, that must mean, it was a pretty deep chapter, so this meta stuff is always next level. It's always next level. So, meta has taken to be a prefix that means that you're not just, like, in the thing that you're talking about, you've gone beyond that. You've gone to the next level than that. And so, metagaming is taken to mean that you've pulled yourself out of the game and you're using something else, anything else. It doesn't come from the game world. It doesn't come from the game experience. In a tabletop RPG, it doesn't come from your character's knowledge and information that they would have. But it comes from your understanding as a player. It comes from maybe your understanding of the game mechanics. It comes from your understanding of story tropes. Comes from your understanding of, like, the GM looked annoyed because she got into a fight with someone, and so she's probably angry today and is going to make things nastier for the PCs. It can come from any kind of reason.
Yeah, like it might be your understanding of, like, the game world, that the character, parts of the game world that character may not have been exposed to.
Yes.
As well.
It can come from can come from cheating by, like, reading in advance on purpose what the adventure the GM is running will be and looking to see the encounter. Like, metagaming is any time that you bring in anything other than what was strictly presented within the game. And you bring it to the game. But the thing about that is, that's not always bad to do. In fact, sometimes, a lot of times you need to metagame, and you probably still are metagaming, even if you don't think you are. For instance, when the GM describes to you certain factors about the game world, the GM is not going to be able to describe literally everything that your characters see and hear, that they smell and feel. You're going to have to be able to make inferences that are based on knowledge that you're bringing into it that hopefully, like, maybe would be sort of parallel or similar to knowledge that your character might also have, but it is coming from your own inferences in those cases.
Yeah, because the thing is that what you're seeing of a character is a lot more limited than the view of an actual person. They're only the bits that the GM describes, the bits that you play out. So there's a lot more that's going on in their lives. There's a lot more that's going on in the conversations that they have with others and in their understanding of the world. So when you use your general understanding of broad features of the setting and of, real world physics and things like that to fill in gaps in a reasonable way, then, it's sort of like you're not going to have a character walk. We've given an example before about like the character who walks over, who says, "I walked 10 feet east. Oh, great, there was a cliff there. You fall off the cliff." Like, you are generally going to have your character behaving as like a person who has goals and is moving toward those goals and is not going to take obviously detrimental actions to themselves.
That's right. So let's take a sort of classic example of this and try to discuss why metagaming is maybe both more than you think and less than you think. So here's a quiz. A red dragon comes swooping over the battlefield and spews fire, incinerating an army worth of people. And the PCs, aghast, come across this massacre as the red dragon is doing that. And in situation A, the wizard says, "Well, I've read the monster manual / bestiary, and I know that red dragons are weak to cold damage, and they take extra damage from this, so I'm going to use my cold spell." Option B. The wizard says, "Well, I know what this is out of character, and that it's a red dragon that's weak to cold, but that would be metagaming, so I'm going to use Fireball. It is my character's favorite spell. I generally use Fireball." So my question to you is, which of these is metagaming? And the answer is both. Both of them are metagaming. In fact, the second one is equally metagaming to the first. The action that the character took in the first one might not have been metagaming if they didn't just blatantly say, and it wasn't blatantly true that they did it because they read it in the book. Because if you try to get into your character's head and the logic of the game world, your wizard in that game world has studied these weird elemental things for like a decade in most games before you can be good enough to cast something like a Cone of Cold or a Howling Blizzard, at least. And so you might not have studied the bestiary enough, and you may not have made a check to identify the monster as a red dragon, but you literally saw it breathing fire. And a specialist in fireballs definitely knows
that things that breathe fire are particularly likely to be immune or resistant to fire.
Yes, that because you probably hit things that breathe fire that were immune to fire a lot of times, even in the adventure. And not only that, but even like most regular people probably know that hot and cold are the opposites of each other. And so it's pretty reasonable after it breathes fire to shoot out cold on it. Now, if there was a dragon in the distance and its scales were red, admittedly red being the color of fire, so there's some wiggle room, but it's just like, let's say you're playing in a game where blue dragons shoot fire, and you see this blue dragon in the distance, and you immediately hit it with cold. Okay, that's a different story, but once you've seen the fire, it is reasonable for a character to probably use cold. Intentionally choosing the worst thing because, well, it would be metagaming if I didn't do that, is actually metagaming, and it's probably even kind of an equally deeper, sometimes deeper level of metagaming than the other one, because you're actually trying to punish yourself by doing like the worst possible
Now, mind
thing.
you, like, if this dragon was a red fire, if this was a setting where red dragons breathe fire and were actually weak to sonic damage, and you're like, it's a red dragon, sonic damage, and your character, like, provably didn't know that, then, like, that's gonna be an issue. But, like, let's say that your character had run into young red dragons in the past and previously determined that they were weak to sonic damage, and then runs into an older red dragon and says, well, the young red dragon was weak to sonic damage, so how about this one? So it's sort of like constructing a general sense of what would be the common wisdom in the world, and what would your character have seen through their experiences in battle that's worked well and that hasn't worked well, and using that as a baseline, using patterns.
Your character is a person. So they aren't your secret knowledge that you already had of these creatures because you read it in the book. but they also aren't like a way to put a badge of honor on your chest to demonstrate how much you're not using the knowledge that you already read in the book by doing something that's especially bad for you, which is equally metagaming. Instead, you need to do something that's much tougher, which can make it easier to handle monsters that you've never seen before, so you don't have to go into that, which is you have to try to simulate that character's real like mental state and thought process. And they wouldn't have a mental state or thought process that is just like stochastically, I have used fireball more times than not, so even though I know it would be bad, I'll use it here to prove that I'm acting normally. That's what a doppelganger pretending to be you would do to try to prove that they're you, is just kind of, or maybe, you know, like a generative AI, where it's like, I have taken down the transcripts of all of your games, and you've built this AI to play your character, and it has seen fireball, so it's just going to fireball. But a real person would take this situation into advisement and would take the fact that the enemy has used fire to know that they might be resistant to
Real
it.
people are going to like try to generalize from their experiences, and sometimes they're going to, you know, overgeneralize. So they might be like, okay, yeah, you know, we fought skeletons in the past, and that like bludgeoning was good, so like let's just use bludgeoning against everything when we can see the bones. Or, you know, and they're probably gonna like overgeneralize. So sometimes it'll often help, but sometimes it will cause you to take extra steps that you don't need to take, and that kind of makes sense. Then you also are gonna have situations where they are particularly careful about avoiding the mistakes of the past, like, you know, avoiding the last, you know, fighting the last battle, that kind of thing. So if there's something where it's like, oh man, you know, it really was a shame that we didn't have like cold iron against these things. Like if there's a case where they messed up and like it was really an issue, they're more likely to remember that too than a case where
That's right. Skeletons and some of those are examples where the game's designers tried to put in something that felt like it would be intuitive in the game, so that, at least hopefully, and that's something that I was talking with Logan, and we tried to reduce the number of, like, gotcha, haha, demons are immune to electricity for no reason, because they were in an old D&D book a long time ago, and instead have resistances and immunities that at least afterwards would make you feel like, okay, yeah, I see what these were tied to. So it felt logical in some ways, which also hopefully means that your characters might be able to deduce some of those just based on their character logic instead of player logic. Now, we have some questions and comments from the chat. So Dustin said something very similar to what we were talking about in the beginning, about how you don't walk off a cliff just with your characters. The GM forgot to describe there was a cliff 10 feet to your east, and you said you went 15 feet east, and they're like, well, I didn't tell you, but there was a cliff, and you die.
Yeah.
So that Dustin says metagaming offsets the senses and training that you don't have because you're playing the character and that the character would otherwise be able to see.
And Dustin had another comment on that too, somewhat related topic to some of the other things we were saying. If a first-time player who never played any RPG before would think of it on their own, would you punish them?
That's exactly right, and that's how it's metagaming, to go against yourself when you refuse to do something that even a first-time player probably would have done.
I think that this is also another reason why playing with new players is really good.
It can give you a sense of what they would do.
Give you a sense of when you play with new players, it reminds you more about like what do fresh eyes see, and can help you counteract this impulse to metagame against yourself if it's something you struggle with. New players are an excellent antidote.
That's right. So there's a question from Kojo that says, specifically in organized play, if you're playing a Pathfinder or Starfinder Society scenario, and based on its description, you make spell or gear choices, is that bad or good metagaming? So here's what I would say. Pathfinder and Starfinder Society scenarios are usually designed with a briefing, after which you can go ahead and you're given a little bit of time to like purchase stuff and prepare your spells, if you are a prepared caster, before you're actually thrown into the deep end. In some of the very early years, they sometimes tried to like turn the briefing into a flashback within meta race and be like, you're in a jungle. Oh, you remember back that you weren't in a jungle and you had the briefing. And it sort of seems like you would have had to already prepare before you were in the jungle, but that's been moved away from, specifically because your characters are professional adventurers who received a briefing and intel. And so it is more it's easier to not metagame and instead just use your character's knowledge if they're like, all right, here's the intel, now prepare. Now, if you're going to prepare based on the vague description that you have beforehand, I would say that make a list of those in your head.
Yeah.
And you're probably helping the table because you don't have to waste time during the table. And then if the briefing, for some reason, doesn't tell you that they assault on the fire fortress of the crocodile god, has fire or crocodiles, and they're like, what are we doing today? Are we assaulting the fire fortress of crocodile god? No. We're going to monkeys, and they live in the river. That's your briefing. And you're like, it is? Okay, I won't use that list before. I guess if we think we're going to monkeys in the river, that's fine. But if you had the fire crocodile things that were prepared in advance, then when they're like, well, we must assault the fire fortress of the crocodile god. You're like, great. All right, my character gets this anti-crocodile unguent, and I'm going to get resistance from fire.
Yeah.
And these are my things. And so you will then be ready to go, and you should be ready to get rid of it if it turns out your character didn't have that information.
Yeah. And that way, you know, in many cases, then a lot of the things that are just broadly speaking, where it's like, oh yeah, you know that this is an adventure where you guys are going to be fighting undead because the briefing told you're going to fight undead, but like, you know, maybe if you're going to run across some really specific undead that has a weakness to sonic damage, say, I don't know why sonic damage is what I'm thinking today, like, because you knew that from the description, but your characters had no reason to know that, then you don't put that in there. But I do think it is this is part of sort of the reward of the recall knowledge text at the beginning of the adventure, is to know a little more about what you might be getting into. So it is most fair to apply knowledge based on what your characters told in the beginning, and also sort of what they kind of know about the world. Because when they come in, like characters say, sometimes at least somewhat prepared, shouldn't have tried to prepare. Like the characters,
because you've had 3 years of training.
You've had 3 years of training, so like having good general information about things that you might usually use, and having like a standard kit that you bring, like absolutely having an idea of what kinds of things you might bring in a situation, because then like you're kind of doing the player equivalent of like the GM rule about not over preparing, not spending huge amounts of time preparing for any kind of situation. You're like, okay, I'm gonna prep for this one because, you know, my character went to Pathfinder school for 3 years to know how to prepare quickly when they heard a little bit of information.
That's right. So I see a lot of comments in the chat that are supportive of our sort of metagaming against yourself. Comments like, this bird is made out of fire. I probably shouldn't use fireball. Or Rico saying, my character doesn't know about the existence of resistance or hit points and thinks this creature is just extra tough, so I should switch tactics. Or my character can't know how far I can move in one action. That's metagaming. So I should just kind of move a sudden charge at a creature that is actually 10 feet out of my reach, and then not make the attack because I'm out of reach at the end of it.
So I actually think that this is a broader topic on, you know, how much your characters know about the underlying mechanics of the game, which are sort of the rules of their world in a way. You know, they're probably not necessarily going to call it by the same names. You know, the characters might not say the word armor class, but they are aware of the fact that some creatures are harder to hit because they have thick armor or dodgy. Some creatures are like can take a lot of beating before they go down. Some creatures, like, if you burn them with fire, it doesn't do anything, or it doesn't seem particularly effective, or that kind of thing. They're aware of, broadly speaking, the effects of the mechanics. You know, even if they don't like have the same words and names for them. I mean, every group is going to have their own sense of like, and a lot of games can differ in this too. And you know, exactly how much do you know about, you know, what the number of hit points that the creature has, and how
even characters might differ in the way that they understand some of these concepts. So I'll give you an example. I was playing Mutants and Masterminds, and I had a character with some really obscene abilities that basically, if the enemy failed a certain save, they would just lose. And that's generally true in a lot of D20 type games, that those can exist. Mm-hmm. But I kind of wanted to balance the fact that she was that powerful, but because I didn't want to just be sitting there being like, well, on my turn, I'll just keep spamming this and some percentage of the enemies will lose because it hits them all. And then after a few turns, they probably have all lost. So I decided that one of the character's flaws is that she was extremely arrogant. And so while there is a conception of saving throws and, you could have made the saving throw, there's also things that could just be immune to your type of power source. It means in Mastermind. That's true in a lot of RPGs. And so my character assumed that she was so powerful that nothing could possibly resist her effects unless they were immune. So if she tried it once and it didn't work, she didn't do that again. She switched to something else because she was like, well, there must be immune. And I think that kind of works. I had a character in Pathfinder 2 that was similar, except there is no limit to how high your difficulty class can be. Or sorry, in Pathfinder 1. There's no limit to how high your difficulty class can be there, unlike Mutants and Masterminds. And so it really was probably true that things were immune to mental effects or mind affecting if Aryan Road couldn't take them out in one spell.
Face Sorcerer, etc.
Because of the fact that her DCs were just through the roof and they had to roll twice and take the lower result on their saving throw. And so even though once or twice there were enemies that were not immune, that just Arya thought were immune, she would just stop trying and she'd be like, well, I guess I have to use one of my weaker spells. They were clearly immune to mental effects. And that's a way that you can sort of try to get into your character's head. Even though I knew sometimes, I was like, no, I know this creature's not immune. I just got very unlucky. But I figured that Aryan Road did not have a lot of sort of like knowledges of creatures, so she had no idea, and she has faced a decent number of things that are immune to her.
Yeah, and another thing that you'll sometimes see with the group is they're like, a few people try reflex saves effects and none of them seem to be working, so then people start switching to like fortitude save types effect, because that's not about like knowing what the specific number is. It's just like, like this creature seems pretty dodgy. Maybe we should try attacking it in a different way.
Right, and in that case, it could just be they rolled high.
Yeah.
I actually literally had that situation at one point where I'm pretty sure the monsters were not that strong in reflex, but they critically succeeded again and again and again and again. And they were weak to the reflex cantrip that I had. And they were not weak to the other thing that I had that wasn't reflex. Honestly, attacking their AC was probably much worse.
Yeah.
But given that they got like 3 or 4 critical successes in a row, the character was just like, okay, they obviously are like gods of reflex. Let's do something else.
So then, considering the characters would generally be aware that there is sort of the defensive durability, the defensive dodginess, and like the defense of the mind, whatever they call that, and that spells are going to target one of those 3.
They target the mind, the mental essence, the body, directly attacking your life force, or they might come after you physically, in which case you have to dodge out of the way, perhaps.
Yeah.
So now Kojo says maybe recall knowledge type skills are the built-in metagaming mechanic. I would say almost the opposite. Recall knowledge, much like the GM's ability to describe to you what the scene is and what your character sees when they look at the room or read the box text, is actually a conduit to give that game knowledge to the players so that they can use that instead of metagame knowledge. So it actually transfigures the metagame knowledge into game knowledge.
Yes.
And the GM can choose, and should, I think in a lot of cases, choose to give interesting or useful information that they know the players would want to use as recall knowledge information, so that whether they knew it or not originally, they can now act upon it as game knowledge.
As a matter of fact, recall knowledge checks can be an excellent way to handle those situations if you're just like, oh gosh, I can't figure out if my character would be able to deduce this from this situation. I'm not sure. You can ask your GM, like, oh, can we do a check here to see if I remember this kind of thing, or if I would think of this kind of thing.
Exactly. And so, sort of, as you can see from this, while metagaming is maligned, and honestly, there are some pretty nasty things that can happen with metagaming that really can make the game less fun for the other players, there's also a lot of situations where metagaming is not only good for the game, but necessary. There are just so many things that you just have to do almost every session that are metagaming, and that if you didn't metagame, it might grind things to a halt. And sometimes when it comes to role-playing components, the avatar of this reverse horror story of, oh, I'm not metagaming is, well, that's just what my character would do.
Yeah. So let's talk about, what my character would do, because you more often hear about that's what my character would do as being like player A, you're being a complete jerk. Well, that's what my character would do. What the character would do is, first of all, even real people are complex, contradictory, inconsistent, and ever-changing. People make mistakes, people grow, people shift, people have things that depend on their circumstances, they forget things,
Yes.
So
Linda has talked about this before when she was playing a character over a very long-term campaign, and there's also a gap, and then later on, Linda was saying to me, is like, I'm worried because although I really like where I'm at with this character now, I feel like I might have changed things, and it might not be the same as before we took the gap. And I said, good, because we usually metagame as players to just sort of almost like an old sitcom where they didn't have continuity between the episodes that much, to just, no matter what seems to have happened and how much the character's arc seems to have progressed, they kind of, because you have a sheet that describes what they were like originally, shift back to the norm and don't evolve and change as much as a real person would in a lot of cases.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, I'm playing this character, now I'm going to get into this character mindset. Well, and that's one thing that I really like about games that have some kind of a mechanic that's like, what did you learn this session? Or like having that kind of discussion to concretely think about what the character is internalizing. So because the characters are so flexible and dynamic, there's a lot of ways that they can respond to things. And another thing too is that you're only seeing small snapshots of who they are and how they are, and you as the player have a lot of choice in how you want the character to respond to their circumstances, and you can help define them by their choices. So you can make decisions based on, sometimes, if you're thinking like, gosh, I could see my character doing thing A or thing B. I could see my character like ignoring this opportunity and staying home because it's safer, like going out and embracing it. And you're like, I think that, maybe, I'm not sure which one they would do, but I think that, based on the things that I know about the setting, that if I have them pick option B, then it's going to be hilarious. That is totally legit. Like, if option B is something that is like, my character has an anathema against, I don't know, like, what does the character have an anathema against? My character has an anathema against, like, playing music in taverns or whatever. So, like, obviously they wouldn't do that. But something that, like, they have a strong value against.
Even if they, you get into the worst situation, not when it's like, you can see on my sheet that I literally can't do this, guys. And not when it's like, well, I could have done either of these, but maybe I'll choose the one that's really nasty to everyone. But instead, you get into bad situations when it's like 80, 90%. Yeah, this is kind of the thing that's in my character's wheelhouse. And honestly, it's really scummy and will make everyone very upset. But even if you said, this is what my character would do, they would still be angry, but they would probably admit that it is likely to be what your character would do. That gets you into a situation where, but you might not have, right? And so metagaming can be really good in that situation. Instead of making the game miserable for everyone else just so you can do the thing that you, probably would have done, this is an opportunity for you to ask yourself a difficult question, which is, okay, 90% my character would have done this. It's very much in their wheelhouse. It goes directly towards one of their main personality tenets or goals. Everyone's going to hate it. It's going to mess us up. We're going to waste a lot of time. Possibly other characters will die or lose some things that are very important to them. So, okay, I'm going to start from the premise of that I'm not going to do this thing that is going to be awful for everyone else.
How do I get
why?
that?
Yeah, why? I want to not just do it metagame because it's awful, but because I'll sprinkle a little metagaming in here that I'm going to decide that this other one that was much less likely, but I want to do it in character, so let me think about why.
And you can enlist others too. You can even
You can ask them, be like, hey guys, My character would definitely attack this person that has the things that you guys all need because they're part of the organization that murdered my entire family, and this is a whole plot arc, but it looks like it's going to disrupt everything. So first of all, GM, I want to check before, like, when you put this all together, you could just tell me right now if I'm wrong that it's going to disrupt everything. And the GM's like, oh no, if you attack it will definitely disrupt everything. Just as you expect, all the things you just said. Yeah, this player is going to lose their entire arc. This person's personal artifact will get corrupted and destroyed. This person's brother will die, and the airship will blow up. Just like you said, all of that is true if you attack now. Maybe the GM will be like, I can't tell you, but that's a pretty good guess. So why don't you operate on that knowledge for now? And then maybe the other players will have an idea. One of them will say, well, you know what? It felt like your character really got along with my character's brother, who I was trying to save during that time that we actually found my brother before he was kidnapped again, because he constantly gets kidnapped.
Yes.
And so maybe it's out of, like, this growing relationship with being, like, blood brothers with my brother that we didn't know about, and even you hadn't completely roleplayed, that has been going on behind the scenes, and then you decided that you will put off your revenge out of the sake of a new family. And then you might be like, nah, I don't think I don't buy that one, but thank you. Yeah. And then you could keep listening, or maybe you'd be like, yeah, that sounds cool. I like that plot arc.
Or one of the ones that you can definitely use for this one is like, is there a reason the character that would, you're like, oh gosh, they would do this thing that would be really disruptive. Is there a reason they could be out of the room?
That's another possibility. Too.
Maybe they're working on something else. Like I definitely use this one actively in first edition in Pathfinder Society, where I was like, okay, I'm playing a very like lawful and upstanding paladin who's just gonna blurt out everything that she's told, and be very honest and straightforward. However, she is also very gullible and very unobservant. So like I go ahead and tell everyone this, and then like whenever it was like, okay, yeah, people are doing something that's like a little more something they wouldn't really want the paladin to see, I would be like, oh yeah, while you guys were having that conversation, I was out in the stable taking care of my axe beak.
Right. So maybe you're like, no, the blood brother thing, I didn't really establish that before. My character is dark and edgy. I haven't found room in my heart for another family yet. It's about my vengeance. And so maybe one of the other players says, okay, so it's about your vengeance, but think about this. The airship is going to get blown up. We could have captured that airship, and honestly, that will just help us a lot overall. In fact, if we don't do this and blow up the airship, we'll probably get this airship almost for sure. Are you going to let that organization that killed your parents also take this airship from you? Is that the right kind of revenge? The one that's going to be tainted with that and another person's brother being killed that let them... Yes, technically your actions are what's going to cause the death of the brother and the airship to explode and all those, and the armor to get, artifact armor to get destroyed, but like, that is letting them win against you because they've made you so desperate that you think the only way you can get a revenge is to get a incomplete revenge here, that where they get all of these miniature victories. Surely you want you would be okay deferring your revenge for now to get a more complete victory later, and then maybe the edgelord characters are like, yes, that's right. They won't take another single thing from me. Yeah. You are leaving now with your lives, and you should be grateful. And then you've come up with it together, something that fits with what the characters' motives and mindset are, even though it seems to go against what they would have done in the moment. But you did use a little metagaming in that you rejected the other arc, which would have theoretically also been valid to take for that character, but would have been awful for everybody else.
And then
you also use not metagaming to make your final explanation.
And you've also defined something else about that character, that character has learned that there are some circumstances under which they're willing to wait in order to secure a more complete victory, and then you can use that to help.
They've learned that they care about patience and a fuller victory over having the victory sooner. And maybe their hot-blooded vengeance has now come to a colder, slower boil.
Yes.
And they're going to try to destroy even more of this evil organization rather than the one who just was the one who killed their
parents. And maybe the character themselves didn't realize that until they were posed with that difficult situation and then had to grapple with it and make a decision.
Absolutely. So as you can see here, you can actually get into some very interesting in-game thinking, character development that is sort of sparked by a metagame reason initially, even if you don't entirely use metagame logic. Now, obviously, there's a way to do this that's entirely metagaming, where it's like, oh, it's my vengeance people. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to pursue vengeance against them because you guys will get mad and it'll mess up the game. But my character would normally have wanted to, and I can't think of any reason they didn't, but they just don't, because I'm not a jerk. Let's keep going. And, like, to be honest, that keeps the peace. It might not be as fulfilling for you as trying to come up with the in-game reason of working together with people while you did that, but that is a situation where you just purely metagamed, and it probably was better than just kind of running roughshod through everything. But it also depends on your group's social contract. The other players might get really dispirited and demoralized too, and be like, "Yeah, well, we're very happy you didn't do the thing that messed everything else for us." But it is kind of sad that you feel like you just had to completely turn your character into a robot, or just have them not do the thing that would make sense for them too. So it can lead to a situation potentially where it's not as satisfying, even if it was still probably better than the alternative.
So one other broader topic that was touched on in chat, but we didn't really get into as much, is sort of the combat logistics. Things like, exactly how far do you move? What is the exact area of your effects? That sort of thing.
That's true. Because, honestly, a lot of the people who decry about metagaming when you make these decisions, some of which might have made sense in characters, have absolutely no qualms about, like, putting an area of effect template, like, carefully on the map for, like, 5 minutes, looking for exactly the one that will
hit the most enemies without hitting any allies.
Just at the edge, within inches, have one more enemy than the other ones while not having any allies. And it's like, yes, probably your character is focused on AoE spells actually does have a pretty advanced, like, spatial visualization ability, because you probably have to focus and visualize the space where you're going to create the magical effect in order to make the spell happen. Probably much better than we would in real life. But even then, the ability to, like, snap to grid and spend that much time during your 6-second round that you're also having to cast the spell is much more unrealistic than most things that people complain are metagaming, while usually that's considered totally fine and even expected that you would do. In some ways, theater of the mind can help you avoid that, because it's based more off of just sort of the kind of sort of instinct and description that the characters might have, although they can actually see it. And so if you're not as good at visualizing it, or your GM's not as good as describing it, you could be at a disadvantage in theater of the mind as well.
I really like the question that Kojo just asked here. Speaking of combat metagaming, is it metagaming to ask the other players in my party what their abilities, combat preferences are to find synergies? I would say it falls squarely under the territory of conversations that your characters definitely would have had that you didn't play out.
Yes, it would be kind of absurd if, like, unless you're playing with someone whose shtick is that they just are hiding their information, which has happened before. Like, when, in Pathfinder 1, when Ultimate Combat came out, the day it came out at Gen Con, my little brother made a Mysterious Stranger, which is a type of archetype for Gunslinger. And whenever anyone, including the GM, asked what he was, he just said he was a mysterious stranger. Which nobody had read the book, like, it came out like an hour before this.
Yes.
They did not know what that was. And they're like, yeah, but what are you? He says, I'm a mysterious stranger. And he didn't even use his guns most of the time unless we got into a harder fight. He just was kind of just going around being mysterious, using some of his other weird class features. And that was kind of his shtick, and that's fine. But most of the time, unless they literally want to do that, your characters definitely would have talked to their friends that they're going into life and death situations fighting with to at least know.
Both of our lives depend upon how well we can coordinate together in combat. Should we perhaps talk about how we like to fight? YOLO.
You never get into a situation where like orcs are murdering you and you're like, I wonder what these other 3 guys can even do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know. That guy with the robe, I hope he's a mage and not like a fighter who's just wearing a robe and carrying a stick for cosplay. Or like a peasant who likes wearing robes.
Yeah.
Maybe some aristocrat's daughter who just like wanted to go on an adventure and has no combat skills. Like, you almost definitely have talked to them in some point in time.
You also are going to remember what worked well and what didn't work well in your past fights together with an ongoing group. Like,
you probably have been doing training and like just some kind of like practice battles against mock enemies, or like even describing or talking about it, or if you have 2 martial characters, maybe they even fight against each other to like look at their own strengths and weaknesses and try to grow better with weapons over time. And so you're likely to have a pretty good sense of what they can do.
Now, one thing that we talked about that is like, if let's say the characters are in their middle of the dungeon and like they've just leveled up and like just gained new abilities that they haven't even had the chance to try out yet. Sure, their fellow party members might not, and they may not be like super familiar with those abilities.
Especially if they're like a sorcerer and it's just like, I don't know what came out of my bloodline. This is just Whereas for a wizard, at the very least, it would be like, I've been telling you how I'm studying Howling Blizzard, and I've been studying Howling Blizzard for like a month.
Yeah.
And so on the day when I get it, I could be like, guys, I figured out Howling Blizzard. Remember that thing I've been constantly muttering about how I couldn't quite get it? I've got it.
Yeah.
Whereas the sorcerer's just like, Blizzard just came out. I don't know. I just let it go, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or like, maybe the fighter's been trying to get this technique while like training with the ranger for a while, and then she's like, not quite. And then she's like, yeah, we got it. I got that technique.
Exactly. So, in that sense, I would say normally it's more of metagaming when you're just like, well, you didn't tell me what your character could do yet. And so I just didn't know that you had Fireball, so I rushed into the middle of these enemies, even though I know on your sheet that it has Fireball, and you've told me out of character that you have it, and you're even saying right now, I have Fireball. Wait, but your character hasn't reacted yet, and so, therefore, you would not have had time to tell me that, and I had no reason to know that you have Fireball.
I was just laughing at Rico's comment. Mark Sorcerer apparently doesn't even know proper incantations.
There you go.
Because you were like, blah, blah.
Blah, blah. Everyone knows blah, blah is the correct incantation for Howling Blizzard. Have you ever cast Howling Blizzard in real life without saying blah, blah?
Yeah. I mean, also, like, Blizzard has blah, and blah, blah, blah has blah.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, yeah, they're basically the same thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
Obviously correct. The best kind of correct. Even better than technically correct.
That's true.
So, in that sense, it's more of metagaming to go against yourself. But people often just think it's only metagaming when it gives you an advantage.
Yeah. Another thing, too, is that, like, you can also consider how similar are those circumstances to the ones that the characters have fought in the past. Like, if this is the first time that your characters have ever found an opponent that, like, flies or that's incorporeal or whatever, and they've never dealt with that before, then having them be, like, more, like, out of sorts for that makes sense. Or, like, if the combat situation dramatically changes in some complicated way, maybe they don't have perfect coordination and handling that as well, too. Oh, it's more like the first time. Well, there you go. Mark says Wallspring Mage. Change the incantation. Yeah, but what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So like, there's sort of the idea that, talking is a free action, but at some point, if you having, like, paragraphs and paragraphs of conversation during combat, like, maybe that would wind up being a metagame type thing. I feel like, to me, that's more based on, how much would the characters reasonably have prepared for in their training in the past? What would they reasonably prepared for? And if it's just like yes, well, clearly we know exactly what to do when the room gets split in half with a wall of force, and then a dragon breaks through the ceiling on one side, and the other side a portal opens to hell, and, like, yes, we've obviously prepared for this specific situation.
We know what happens with dragons and portals to hell, and now we will say a short amount of free talking. The bard who's put a life link on the enemy so that any damage the bard takes will be taken by the enemy turns a blade on himself and then says, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To die, asleep no more, or by asleep we say to end the heartaches and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that brings on the teeth of so long life. For who can bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the influence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietest make with a bare bodkin? Who could fardels bear to grunt and sweat under this weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear the ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscious stuff make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickly nor by the pale cast of thought and enterprise of great pith and moment. In this regard the current turn awry and lose the name of action. It's like, no, you can't say all of that. You just can't.
God just said that would be the best. It's so close. Oh my god.
And then they stab themselves.
Yes.
And it's like, no, you can't say all of that.
Although imagining someone saying all that and like how much
Within 6 seconds?
like imagine like the accelerated video of that and how much like chipmunk speed that would be. Here's the real question. Has Mark heard that in the original Klingon? I've not heard the Klingon version.
The Comlet. I've seen it sold in the original Klingon like a long time ago at like the Star Trek experience at some hotel. But I've not heard it in the Klingon, and I did not get it in the Klingon, but I did see it in the Klingon.
There you go. Oh my god.
You seem to be amused, Linda.
Oh my
Is
God,
that metagaming?
No, it's fine. Have the side-legged feet. It's much faster. Can you imagine if I guess it would just be... You would just say, like, you know... No, I imagine you would just, like, be, like... You have, like, some kind of thing where you talk about, like, exactly where in the play that is from.
Mm-hmm. There's a specific
It's
time for monologue from Hamlet.
What was, like, the act in... Whatever the act in the scene that was in.
There
like,
you
a
go.
Hamlet act this scene. Yep.
There you go. There's just a sign where you just do monologue from Hamlet and then you're done.
Yeah.
That is much more efficient than having to say all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
So, in any case, the fact of the matter might be that metagaming is not so scary when you think about it as a full concept. In fact, the metagaming that you use to avoid metagaming can wind up being worse for the game, for you, and just in terms of enjoyment or even suspension of disbelief than the kind of metagaming where you are trying to either make the game work a little better, or in some cases, you use your metagaming to try to just center yourself around what the character would know. Cordon off things that don't make any sense for them to know.
And cordon off things that it would be, like, decisions that you know are going to make a bad experience for others.
And then try to use game logic and explanations to explain everything else. So this is how metagaming can be good in a tabletop RPG. I hope that you enjoyed it. Maybe you were surprised by it. If you thought that metagaming could only be bad. That's our main topic. Please like and subscribe, or even join if you're really interested in what we've got to share. And let's vote for the next episode. So our next episode could be Build a Deity Workshop, where, you know, deities made humans in their image, so we're going to make a deity in the workshop. Ask Arcade Mark Save My Game Q&A, where you can ask questions about your game. GM/player tools backing down, about when it's time to back down, either in-game on either side or even out of game. Sometimes backing down is harder than it seems. Arcade Mark Plays will play a game or other where you can specify whatever you want. And that is the vote. We have one vote for GM player tools.
Let's go ahead and toss some XP to the direction of our viewers.
Yes, that's right. Gain your experience points.
For viewing.
You've gained experience points. It's been happened.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So far, I don't think there were any early voters. So we just have one vote from Garland for backing down.
Kojo is torn between 1 and 3.
Building deities or backing down.
3.
3.
All right.
Okay. So right now, backing down is in the lead, but I think that if it got to be contentious, that it would back down. So let's see if there are any other votes for next Saturday's episode, and we will not be able to have an episode the Saturday after that. Ah, yes, you are catching us live only for a short time because we are about to end after we vote for the next episode. But yeah, we will have one on next Tuesday, next Saturday, but not on the Saturday after that or the Tuesday after that. And then we'll probably be back.
Yeah, so we'll be here on the 21st or the 24th.
That is correct. For maybe obvious reasons on the 24th.
Yes. And 21st is travel day.
Yes, Dustin supposedly left, but he has voted for 3. So
Dustin returned to vote.
3. Yeah, Rico is suspicious because he's the only one who didn't vote for 3. It's sad. He said he's sticking around just to vote against Rico. Obviously. So, that is 4. What is that? 3 votes for 3 and 1 vote for 4. So, 3 has won.
Yes, Mathfinder, we have a short that we're planning to do at some point fairly soon that's very mathy that we think will be up your alley.
Very math. It's got some calculus.
That's true.
It'll be great. Dustin has finished mulching the yard. That explains it.
Protect leshies from snow. Yay!
You gotta do it. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend. And we will see you on Tuesday for whatever our Tuesday episode is, which I forget which one won last time.
Was it another Tyranny?
It was. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had this one for Tyranny. It was
what was the one that was on the list before?
Oh, routines. It was
yes,
routines.
Yes.
So routines on Tuesday, backing down on Saturday, and then we will have no episode for the we will have another Tuesday after that. Then we'll have no episode for the 21st or the 24th. Bye, everybody.
Bye.